It's my privilege to introduce our speaker, Prof. Atif Ahmad. Atif Ahmad is an associate professor and deputy director of the University of Melbourne Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. Maybe I'll share your site. Atif, okay. Yes. So everyone can also see the information without making specific presentation. Okay, Atif currently leads an international team of researchers on high-impact project to develop the Malaysian cyber defense capability. So over these 17 years, Atif has built the leading research team in cyber incident response, conducting over 40 in-depth industry case studies, publishing over 100 scholarly articles, attracting over 5 million Australian dollars and earning industry recognition for practice contribution. Atif is also a member of editorial board of Computer and Security and the Journal of Information Warfare, so to journal. And he has previously worked as cybersecurity consultant for Worley Pearson, Pinkerton, and Sinclair Nightmares. Atif certified protection professional with the American Society for Industry and Security. And for information, you can see for what I share, you can visit his personal website, atifahmad.me. Prof. Atif will describe an evidence-based approach to researching cybersecurity incidents response. And I hope my introduction is not too short because there's a lot. And we only have 1 hour, so for short, Prof. Atif, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adi, and Assalamu alaikum to everyone. I'd like to thank Prof. Nizar and Universitas Indonesia for this invitation. So before I share my slides and talk to the presentation, I would like to say a few things about this presentation, which I hope I'm trying to say to get to increase the level of interest that you might have in what I'm about to say. So whoever's the moderator, if you can mute people as they come in, it'll be wonderful. Okay, so what is this presentation about? It's a really exciting field study of how an organization responds to cyber attack. Now, what's really interesting here is that there's a lot of research that's been happening in cybersecurity. As you know, I'm sure many of you are cybersecurity researchers. The vast majority of this research is focused on the technology perspective, which is the architecture and the configuration of the technology, the technologies that are used in the digital environment for protection purposes. However, there is some research, and I'm one of those researchers that's not, although I have a technology background, my research is in organizational practice. And what that means is that I'm interested more about how the organization behaves, how the humans behave, how the processes are undertaken. That's the workflows, the tasks, the activities, the policies, the procedures, and all of that side of things. So if you can imagine an organization that is being attacked by maybe a nation state or organized crime, something very sophisticated, something very organized, almost like a military style cyber attack. And you can imagine now the organization that's being attacked has to go into crisis mode when it's responding. And we don't know very much about how organizations behave in crises when they're cyber attacked. There's very few case studies out there that look at how organizations behave. And that's mostly because it's very difficult to collect any empirical evidence about the most sensitive cyber operations of an organization. the vast majority of literature out there on cybersecurity that relates to organizations and organizational behavior and practices is all very much expert opinion. Everything from the ISO standards to the NIST standards that tell organizations what to do. Most of that, those standards and those advisories, they're not based on what you would call empirical evidence. And I know that's really controversial, but I wanted to be deliberately saying that here. It's controversial, but it's true in the sense that so many experts in the world talking about cybersecurity, so little research about how organizations practice. So our research team is very unique in the sense that for the last maybe 15, 20 years, we have been doing case studies. So we go into organizations, we interview all the key employees that are involved in cybersecurity practices, and we ask them what they do and how they do it. And we go through that methodology, the very rigorous methodology of investigating, observing, interviewing, analyzing, and then determining to the best of our ability how the organization's actually doing cybersecurity. So after 15, 20 years of going around and looking at so many organizations that don't do cybersecurity well, and that's the vast majority, we finally found one organization that we would say is world-class in its cybersecurity practice, right? And of course, it's impossible for me to say that it is the best in the world, because that would require me to study every single organization in the world. But what we can say is that this organization has managed to withstand attacks from at least 3 countries for the last 3 to 5 years consistently and predictably, and without a major incident to the extent that the whole organization has gone down. And we know, because if that organization went down, the whole country that organization serves would go down. At least their financial systems would go down. And I'll talk more about that organization. So what's really amazing about this is that this organization is the gold standard. It's the standard for how we see organizations should practice cyber incident response. That's one thing. The second thing is, from a research point of view, this organization explains to us what the best cyber defense could possibly be from a sort of a theoretical point of view. So we know a lot about nation states and how they attack, right? In general, we know the operating model because the Lockheed, the Lockheed Martin kill chain model came out. We know what the process is. We know what the phases are. We also know a lot about the military grade cyber weaponry that's out there that allows these nation states, these organized criminals, to attack in a very organized and sophisticated way. But what we don't know is what is the best defense that an organization can put up. And this is really important for us in cybersecurity practice, because it means that we may be able to come up with a theory about what is organization cyber defense and how to do it in the best possible way. So this is a very exciting case study. And so now I'll just begin to share my screen. Actually, before I do that, I just want to say something in terms of, actually, I'll come back maybe to the background about what cyber incident response is when I get to that slide. So let me share my screen and begin this presentation. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the threat actors and the threat environment, just to give you some background on this. Now, I'm sure many of you who have cybersecurity expertise, research or practice might be very familiar with what a threat actor is, but I'm going to give you an overview of what is going on in the threat environment, at least from a generalized categorization of who the threat actors are and how we should understand their capability and the risks that organizations face. Then I'll talk a bit about the research question that we're asking, present the research design for the study, and the theory that we chose and why we chose this particular theory for this particular study. And then once I set up the research study, I'll then introduce the case organization, its organizational structure, and then I'll give a walkthrough of their capability. What is really amazing or special about this capability? I will walk you through exactly how the organization will behave when it is under cyber attack from a normative point of view, which means from the point of view how the organization's standards and processes and activities work. And then from that, I will, if I have time, hopefully, I will build the process model and explain what this model looks like that we published. And again, if we have time, maybe talk about the barriers. Even after all the wonderful things that they do, what are their flaws? What are their problems? And I'll try very hard to leave at least 10 minutes for questions before we close. Okay. So really quickly, there are 4 key categories of threat actors that are really relevant here. And it's this really interesting graph, which I pulled from an ISACA manual, maps the risk exposure to the organization against the capability of the attacker. So in other words, it's basically saying, what is the risk to the organization compared to or correlated against the capability of the attacker? So this is the measure or yardstick that we're using to look at these 4 categories of attackers. And the interesting thing is, so let me just introduce the 4 categories. On your left-hand side here are the least sophisticated. So these are the amateurs. They don't know how to come up with their own cyber attack, so they copy other people's attacks. And so when they do attack an organization, they just do so sometimes without any real strategic purpose. They attack an organization because they're there. They have a vulnerability. It can be exploited. They can attack them. Then the category to the right of that is what we call sophisticated attackers. These are much more professional, much more expert cyber hackers who are usually a lot older and have a very specific reason for going on the attack. And they usually will spend time and effort trying to single out an organization, attack them because they have either money or they have sensitive information they want or some reason for the attack. But they are very knowledgeable about what they're doing. And they certainly are more capable than the amateurs because they can come up with their own new attacks that the amateurs cannot. Corporate insiders are actually considered to be even more dangerous than the left-hand side, right? And the reason why is because they sit behind the lines of defense that an organization has constructed to protect itself. So when you trust an employee and that employee abuses that trust and exploits you as an organization, then you are very vulnerable to that. And that's why your risk exposure is particularly higher. And lastly, these are the most dangerous of them all. Right. And this is what we called APT or advanced persistent threat. These are specialized teams who come together. Each individual on the team comes together because they have a unique skill, a unique capability, and their entire purpose as a team is to bring down an organization. And this team can be sponsored by a nation state. It can be sponsored by an organized crime organization. But at the end of the day, they are relentless. They are very organized. They are very disciplined. They're very sophisticated. They're very well resourced. And they frequently will spend 6 months to a year studying an organization before they actually launch an operation. And this is about as professional as you can get. Now, if we compare these categories from a risk exposure versus attack capability, we find, unsurprisingly, that the most sophisticated actor is the advanced persistent threat. And you can see that from this arrow. It says highest risk exposure, highest capability, as opposed to the amateur, which has the organizations have the lowest risk exposure because they have the lowest capability. Now, this red arrow is the key here. This red arrow tells us what precisely is it about this APT actor that makes them so dangerous. And what the red arrow is telling us is that it's the ability to experiment. Whereas the amateurs can only reproduce what others have done, and the hackers can become a little bit more sophisticated and come up with slightly new variations of what's been done before. The APTs can come up with entirely new types of attacks that organizations have no defense against. And why do they not have any defense? It's because organizations buy software from vendors who train that software on attacks that have most likely been seen before. So if an attack has not been seen before, then the defense is almost blind. There's one other major question or major reason why this is happening, and that relates to these critical questions here. Most organizations, when they suffer an attack, they simply their mentality is that the attack has happened and now we need to restore our organization's normal businesses, its normal operating, routines, and they don't think about who the attacker is, why the attack happened, what the attacker wants, or what is the capability of this attacker, and will they come again? These are questions that very few organizations ask. Most organizations have a maintenance engineering point of view where they simply just restore their services that have been affected and they go back to their regular routine operation. So what are organizations doing about these attacks? Basically, they're doing two things. Organizations invest heavily on cyber defenses, and that means firewalls, intrusion detection systems, antivirus, anti-malware, and also the practices and processes around all of that, from risk management to policy to training. So that's what we call the shield. The big shield is all of those preventative controls that the organization puts into place to avoid an attack and avoid a successful attack. But having said that, most organizations also accept that they will be attacked and those attacks will eventually get through their shield. And when they do get through, they need to have some kind of response. This is what we call cyber incident response. And what that means is for organizations that can afford it, they have a team that comes into play once an attack is detected. So this is the process that you see at the bottom hand. This is the common process that's been published in the literature, which is that an organization detects an attack and then they diagnose an attack, then they contain the attack from spreading, they try to eradicate the root cause of the attack, and they restore their normal business operating procedures. And after the attack has been eradicated and it's been declared over, then they engage in a post-mortem or you can say post-incident review, where they ask questions about how well they did this incident response and what they can learn for the future. This is the classic model. It's been published and it's been exercised and it's in all the standards, and it is very wrong, right? The whole model is misdirected. And why do I say that? Because the model has one big assumption, and that assumption is that there is no intelligence behind the attack. This is an engineering response model. So it's kind of like your hospital. If you have been affected by a disease like COVID and you go up to the hospital counter and you go to the nurse and say, I'm sick, the nurse is going to do a diagnostic, right? They're going to check your blood pressure. They're going to check your temperature. They're going to maybe ask you to open your mouth and they're going to put something inside of it and they're going to test it and say, you've got COVID or you've got this or you've got that. And once they diagnose you, then they're going to probably, if it's a new disease that they haven't seen before, it's a major disease or a major incident, they will contain you. They'll put you in a special ward, isolate you, and they'll try to figure out what you have, what your disease is. They'll give you some medicine, some vaccine, something. Maybe vaccine's a bit too late, but some kind of curative control, and they'll try to eradicate that from you. And then they will restore the hospital to its normal operating procedure, and they'll declare that incident over. That is a very good process for a disease. But we're not talking about diseases. We're talking about threat actors. Threat actors are different. You cannot treat them like a disease because a disease has no intelligence behind it. The disease presents to you, and it doesn't try to trick you. It doesn't try to deceive you. It doesn't try to exploit your biggest vulnerability. So the equivalent would be a disease that only comes on a weekend when the staff is low and exploits that particular staff member that is got no training and kills all the important people in the organization that have any ability to counteract it. That would be the equivalent. And that's not what's happening. So we have to treat a cyber incident completely differently. So how do we do that? That's what we're going to look at in a moment. I'm just going to say some very quick things that is going to give you some background to the case study. First of all, we've learned that in most organizations, cybersecurity is delegated to a technology function. So in most organizations, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 major parts. You have the leadership team, you have business operations, you have IT operations, and you have other, which is legal, human resources, et cetera, et cetera. I divide an organization into these parts because it's very relevant to how we're looking at the organization for this study. So if we understand that there is a leadership team, a business operations team, an IT operations team, and we understand that the people in charge are the leadership team, and we understand that when cybersecurity is concerned, the leadership team usually delegates this to IT operations. IT operations is a cost center, not a revenue generator. All the money in the organization is made in business. The IT only consumes money, they don't make money. And that means that when the organization's leaders delegate it to IT, cyber to IT, they consider cyber to be a cost, and that cost needs to be reduced, which means they are always cutting the budget for cyber. And they are also saying that the people who lead the IT function, that is the CIO and the CISO, they at best lead a cost of the organization, not its revenue. And what we see from our research and from the research coming from MIT Sloan School of Management is that the first-class citizens, the people who run the organization, are business people. If you come into this organization as a business employee, you'll go up the ranks until you become CFO, and you will eventually run the organization. But if you come in as a technology person with a technology degree, you at best can become the CIO. You cannot, almost impossible to jump from the CIO to CFO or to CEO, right? You cannot make that jump because you are seen as a technology person, not as a business person. And that means a lot for cybersecurity. It means that the cybersecurity people are second-class citizens. It means that they don't have the authority and the power, and they don't have the ability to dictate how much money they have and what the organization does when it's under attack, right? That comes from the business side of the organization. Okay, it's relevant. It'll become more relevant when we come to the case. So really quickly, there is a fundamental increasing asymmetry between the capability of the attackers and the capability of the defenders. So what this means is, if we look at the trends, we see that the attackers are getting more sophisticated, more organized, and more capable of penetrating organizations. And organizations are not developing like that. They are not able to keep up. And the main reason, from my point of view, is because of these ISO standards and the NIST standards. Because these organizations believe that if they comply with ISO and NIST, then they're secure. And that's not true, right? And the reason why they believe that is because the business people basically only want to spend just enough money for compliance, not for defense, right? And so they tell the IT, just comply with the ISO standards and NIST, and that's it. We don't need to do any more. And that doesn't work for critical infrastructure organizations like banks, telcos, oil, water, gas. That's not the way to go about defending those organizations. So what theory did we use? We used situation awareness theory because I don't have a whole lot of time. I'm looking at the watch. We only have about 15, 20 minutes, and I need to get to this case study. So we use situation awareness theory. We didn't use the cyber incident response process. Okay. So a lot of people would have said, why didn't you use this process for your theory? And the answer is, this is just expert opinion. It's not a theory. It hasn't been tested in a range of domains. And we are looking deeper at something that we want to publish in the top journal. And so we want a very sophisticated, very clearly defined theory that explains its constructs in a way that we can redefine or translate those constructs into the cyber context. So we asked this question. We deliberately looked at situation awareness theory, and then we asked this question: how can organizations acquire or have situation awareness of the incident environment? We didn't ask how can organizations respond to cyber attack. The reason why we didn't is because we wanted to connect with the theory. And we realized that in order to respond to an attack, you must have situation awareness, right? In order to be competent in responding to an attack, you must be able to at least understand what is going on. And that's the precursor, and that's the model we decided to build. So what is situation awareness theory? It's a very simple theory. It basically says this: every individual lives in an environment, right? So the theory is actually a human cognition theory. So it says you live in an environment and you are looking at the things that are happening around you. And if you have situation awareness of your surrounding environment, then you're able to make good decisions about what you want to do. And you can act on those decisions, and those decisions change the environment. And then you notice the changes in the environment, and that updates your situation awareness. And then you make another decision. So it's like a loop. And in this loop, I become aware, I make a decision, I execute that decision, the environment changes, so I become aware again of the change, and then I make another decision, and then I execute, and so forth. And this theory was developed for fighter pilots because fighter pilots sitting in a jet cockpit needed to become aware of all the enemy combatants in their airspace. So this was a decision support system created for the fighter pilot to allow them to engage with their adversaries. Okay. Now, here's the important thing. The theory defines situation awareness itself into three component or constituent blocks. In order to have situation awareness, you need to have three things. You need to perceive the environment, you need to comprehend the environment, and you need to project from the environment. What does that mean? That means that you need to be able to notice what's happening. And when you notice things going on, you need to be able to understand what those things that are happening, what they mean for you. And then you need to be able to predict what's going to happen in the near future so you can make a good decision about it. Three things, right? So I call this perception, identify the dots here being important pieces of information about your environment. And I call comprehension, connect the dots, which means what does all this information mean for me? And then projection, I mean extrapolate from the dots, which is what's going to happen in the next immediate future. And based on what's going to happen, I can make a decision. Okay, so that's what the situation awareness story is about. Okay, so let's get to the really juicy part of this. The case study of what I will call Finance Central. I won't name the organization for ethics reasons. So this multinational financial organization, their market capitalization is 50 billion US dollars. They operate in 34 countries around the world with 60,000 employees. Their customer base, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is 9 to 10 million customers. Their strategic cyber objective is to maintain the continuity of their global digital platforms. So they're a financial organization. And as you know, modern financial organizations basically run on digital platforms, whether it's ATMs and your online banking and finance, whether it's, you basically interact with your bank and your insurance agencies, etc., completely online now. So they are digitized. So their first objective, maintain continuity of their digital platforms. Second objective, protect the confidentiality of all their sensitive information, whether it's their customer information or their organizational information. Now, why are they a high and an important target? Why are they a critical infrastructure? Because first of all, they have iconic status in the region. Everybody knows this organization. If I were to name the organization, you would immediately recognize it. They manage large fund transfers. And if they go down, the whole one of the countries that they serve, their entire financial systems will go down. Nobody will be able to do any transaction in the whole country, financial transaction, if this organization goes down. Okay. So this elevates them to national critical infrastructure. And it means that certain countries around the world want to bring them down to create inflation and to get the world and the customers and the people in that country to lose trust in that organization, but also the whole country's financial systems. So it's very important for that organization to remain available and to protect their infrastructure from cyber attack. So the organization said to us that they log. So if you consider how every single IT system in the 34 countries that consists of their IT infrastructure has logging enabled. And amongst those log entries, many of them are flagged as security related entries. So they said to us that every 24 hours, they flag 20 billion cybersecurity related log entries relevant to something that's going on, right? So you can imagine 20 billion cybersecurity related log entries that need to be processed, analyzed, and made sense of for that organization every 24 hours, right? That gives you an idea of the size and the scale of this organization's operations. So who did we interview? We interviewed the Chief Information Security Officer, the person who leads the cybersecurity operations, the person who leads cybersecurity strategy, and a level 3 analyst from their Security Operations Center and a level 1 analyst. And that was the most that we could access in the time that we had to do this case study. And on the right-hand side, you see a very basic structure of the organization. You've got the C-suite executive. You've got the security leadership team, which this is actually the cybersecurity leadership team. And then you've got IT operations, and inside operations, they've got their security operations center where they handle all their cybersecurity situation awareness with level 1, level 2, and level 3, basically the different tiers of the analysts that sit there. And you've got, of course, business operations. Okay, so let me come to the main part, which is how do they do their cyber incident response? First of all, let me tell you about their shield. Their shield consists of firewalls, intrusion detection systems, antivirus software, and they buy their technology from 3 different vendors. So they have firewalls from 3 different vendors, intrusion detection systems from 3 different vendors, and so forth, because they don't trust any single vendor. They also have subscriptions to Microsoft Symantec and FireEye, not just any subscriptions, the highest level of subscription, which is very expensive and requires, gives them custom tailored access. So these organizations like FireEye, they have a hotline with them. If FireEye sees anything happen around the world, they will ring them, right, and tell them what is going on. So it's a level of access that is much higher than most organizations have. They have heavy investment in configuring and customizing their defense technology. So when they buy security technologies, they spend not only huge amounts of money buying all these security technologies, but they spend more money customizing them and making sure that the technologies work together. And if anything changes in the organization's environment, so if they adopt a new technology, if they change technology or something goes down or there is a major incident, they have to retest everything in their technology environment to make sure that the effectiveness of the controls is up to the level that they expect. And then they have 2 other things that make them really amazing. One is if any financial organization in the first world, that's the UK and the US, gets attacked, then they get the malware from that, and they can reverse engineer that malware, and their machine learning teams can then automate detection, containment, eradication, and recovery and forensics, and they can integrate that into their shield. So if any financial organization in the world has seen this attack before, then they can automatically deal with it. That allows them then to focus on the things that they don't understand rather than the things that they do. Okay. So how do they develop situation awareness? The first thing they do is that they collect all of those 20 billion log entries and they suck them into what they call an enterprise data security service. That enterprise data security service basically correlates and aggregates all of that. So you can imagine that these log entries are created from different machines, different vendors, different formats, different standards. All of that gets pulled into one security SIEM, which is an event management system, and allows the organization to run a series of algorithms on that data, which then creates alerts. And those alerts pop up on the dashboards of level 1 analysts. There's another system they have that they call an advanced cyber analytics platform, which is customized. Only they have it. And that analytics platform is focused on their employees. So if any employee behaves in a way that's different to their history, then that sets up another alert, which goes to level 1 analysts. So level 1 analysts, of which there are about 15 analysts at any one time, their job is to do what that nurse does in a hospital. They will look at the alerts and they'll begin to create a ticket in a ticket management system, which says, okay, I have a new alert. It's a new incident. I'm going to collect some context. I'm going to analyze it. I'm going to add the context into this ticket, and I'm going to keep building the story behind this ticket. And if I need some help, to understand what is going on, or I don't trust my judgment, I will check with level 2 analysts. And if this incident is considered to be high criticality, then I will kick it up immediately to level 3 analysts. So a level 1 analyst basically looks at individual devices. Level 2 analysts are basically backstops. They just help level 1 analysts when the load is too high. But level 3 analysts can see all IT operations across the enterprise. So they have a global view of the whole organization. And if the organization has a high criticality event, then level 3 analysts will immediately kick in. They will use their analytics tools. They'll look at the patterns. They will analyze them, and they'll be able to move quickly to try to preempt it. Now, we are interested in what happens when the whole organization is under a critical attack. So what happens normally is the alerts that come from level 1 will jump to level 3 immediately, right? And an example is, for instance, if that organization realizes they are losing control over their networks and their systems, that's a very good indicator that it's a level 1, it's a high criticality attack. Okay. Level 3 analysts will do something here. Now they will call in a very special leadership team. This leadership team does not sit constantly 24 hours. They are only created when there's a high criticality event. This leadership team brings in not only the level 3 analysts, but a special leader. Plus they have the extraordinary power of being able to command any business manager to join the team immediately and to explain what is going on in their part of the organization. Okay. And they also have an individual from the specialized threat intelligence team to join their team. The threat intelligence team is very interesting. They help the level 1 analysts understand what is going on because they are profiling these nation states and these organized crime syndicates, and they can explain from the footprints across the digital environment what attacker it might be. So when the threat intelligence team joins with the security leadership team, or their analyst joins, the leadership team's job is to not look at this like a technology problem, but look at it like a business problem. And then to ask the big questions. Who is doing it? Why are they here? What do they want? And their job is to come up with hypothetical scenarios about what this attacker might do in the immediate future, and then to command the technology operations division to take preemptive action. The other thing, so they have 2, what we call bridges, really interesting things, these bridges. One bridge, what we call the operations bridge, allows them to command all the managers in the organization to join a incident response initiative when they say they want it, right? And the other thing is they can bring in the C-suite executive through the management bridge, and the C-suite executive come in. Their job is to explain what is happening at the technical level through a management business perspective. So for example, if this organization is rolling out banking and finance into a new country, like say Cambodia, and in Cambodia, there's an organized crime syndicate that decides to launch a cyber attack, the analysts here cannot tell that this was a business decision that led to the attack. But when the C-suite executive join the cyber incident, they can look at the IP address and say, oh, this attack is coming from Cambodia. That might be because we decided to roll out banking and finance in Cambodia, and they are attacking us because of our rollout. So that is the first time we've seen an organization connect the highest level of the business to the lowest level of technology, and to make that chain of command. And the interesting thing, of course, here is that they can do all of this, set up all of these structures in 24 hours from the time that they detect the attack, right? So that means that the whole organization's configuration changes, and they have the ability to change their defensive posture at the drop of a hat. So lastly, I'm just going to quickly talk through this process model that we built. So we built a process theory model, right? And that means that unlike a variance model, which talks about dependent variables and independent variables and correlations, we actually developed a process model that defines what are the activities of each of the key stakeholders. So we have 3 key stakeholders: junior SOC analysts, the senior SOC analysts, and the leadership team. And we bring in the processes here from the theory. So the theory allowed us to define what are the activities that exist in this organization in a cybersecurity situation awareness perspective, from a cybersecurity situation awareness capacity, that sit in perception, comprehension, or projection. And so this is what we determined. From a static point of view, if you just took a snapshot of the organization, the low-level analysts, they basically collect raw data from IT systems and networks, and they construct that operational view using ticket management systems, right? The level 3 SOC analysts, they have the whole global IT view. They collect raw data across the enterprise from a technology point of view, and they can construct or see the relationships between all of that information and comprehend what is happening at the IT operations view. The leadership team can see what is happening from a business point of view, and they construct the enterprise view from a business perspective across the whole organization. But the security leadership team does one more thing. They also construct the hypothetical scenarios about what is going to happen. And they do that because they have the unique capability to bring in people and to collect that information and make those decisions. Now, that's the static view. Okay. Here's the dynamic view. The dynamic view is that, and this organization can be attacked. Maybe it may have 10 incidents happening in parallel. And when that happens, we see that collectively, if you just look at the green horizontal bar here, perception, it means that the organization can simultaneously, like a multi-threading machine, it can be collecting simultaneously raw data about many different incidents at many different levels. So at a operational level, from a SOC level 1 point of view, or from a level 3 point of view, whether it's a device level or an enterprise level, whether it's at a technical level or a business level, they're constantly collecting data about what is happening in the environment. And they're constantly connecting the data together to create an understanding of what is happening to the environment at all of these different levels simultaneously. And for those critical incidents, they are able to see hypothetical scenarios of all the different things that are happening to them and what they should be doing about that. And they're doing it in two different ways. The data that's coming at an operational level gets pushed up the chain of command all the way to the leadership. But the leadership also, once they understand what's going on, they can see blind spots and say, hold on, we don't have any data about this system or this part of the organization. Go back and collect more data, right? More raw data, analyze it and bring it back to us. And so you see this really interesting, machine that is constantly perceiving, sense making and anticipating, and also is analyzing and escalating, but also de-escalating, as in seeing things at the very highest level and realizing that they need to retask their incident response processes to be able to collect more things. So that machine is basically what this process model is about. We don't really have time to talk about their problems, but if somebody's interested, they can ask a question for that. So what did we do in the study? What is our major contribution? Is the process theory, is the first time that Ensley's situation awareness theory has been used like this. We developed an information processing view of how situation awareness takes place, incident response. But from a practice point of view, we can now go to an organization and say, right, if you want to develop a gold standard cyber incident response process, you may have a SOC, but look at this leadership perspective. You need to create the leadership, and this is how you build the leadership, right? And we now have very specific roles, practices, activities, and organizational structures that we can recommend to organizations to institutionalize so that their incident response isn't just technology focused, but is enterprise focused as well. And that's the big difference. If you ask me, what can organizations now do that they weren't doing before? Well, if you look at our research in Malaysia, we see that all the organizations have a SOC where they have level 1, level 2, level 3, but it's very technical and they don't have the enterprise view. And they don't know how to make the enterprise view. They cannot even think, how can we structure the organization and create the team so we can have an enterprise view? And this is the answer to that question. Okay. 12 minutes for questions.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Atif. Interesting research interesting research experience that in the beginning you try to explain to us. Then interesting comprehensive model that cover from the lowest technology until the highest management. Okay. Now we have a discussion Q&A. So if you have question for Prof. Atif, you can raise your hand so we can communicate directly to him. But if you want to use the chat feature, it's okay. But I think it's better if you ask your question directly. So any question from the audience? Okay, I think, yeah, still waiting
Still
for
thinking.
the audience.
They're still thinking.
From your presentation, I see that there's a slide that you describe about socio-technical theory. So it's interesting because last month I also make a presentation about how this socio-technical theory become one of the
That's interesting. Sean is telling me that the audience cannot unmute.
Okay, so the audience can raise your hand using the raise hand feature. So we can, or I ask try to,
or maybe just drop in chat that you want to speak, and then we'll call your name out.
Okay, yes, we can allow. Okay.
So in the meantime, I'll ask Dorothy Dixer for you, please.
Yeah.
Given what you've done, right? What we've done, what we'd have done differently if you did it again?
Oh God. Okay. What would I have done differently if I could do the study again?
Yeah.
One thing that I would have done differently is I would have tried to interview the business side of the organization. So to understand how they saw the cyber incident response people behaving. And I would have tried to get more of the executives who are non-cyber and non-technical to explain whether they think that cyber incident response or situation awareness is working. So that's one thing I would definitely have done. The second thing I would have done is I would have spent more time after situation awareness looking at how they were learning after the incident, right? So there's so much organizational learning theory out there that's really good. And it would have been a real advantage at that point to ask about how the organization's processes were from a learning point of view. Yeah. And if they would allow me, maybe talk about maybe interview the threat intelligence people a bit more, because we only got one threat intelligence person. I would love to have learned more about how they were looking at threat intelligence. Those were the three things I would do differently. Dorothy, next question.
Yeah, I have a question for Atif. I hope it's okay to get questions from your own team, Atif. Yeah, thanks again for doing the seminar. Fantastic topic and for great research. I'm just wondering, with the organization that has this gold standard kind of, security practice, isn't that something sensitive for them, something confidential that they wouldn't want other organizations to follow? While we are doing this kind of research, and tell the world that this is what the best model is supposed to be. Any comments on that?
That's a great question, because so I've got a sort of a Jekyll and Hyde answer to that. There's two ways of looking at that. One is to say, organizations can never know what other people want to know about them, so they frequently just clam up and say, we're not going to let you come in or ask any questions because we are so afraid about what's going on. And it may not be because they really believe that anything they tell us is going to really be used against them, but it might be that the regulator of their sector is going to take notice of the fact that they are giving up sensitive information, and that's going to affect the security of the organization, right? So that's one view. The other view is that when we go in with these sorts of case studies, we always say to the organization, we will never ask you about your vulnerability, your specific vulnerability, or your specific technology, or what software product you are using, what version, or any of we never will look inside the computer. We will only ask you about your processes, right? So they usually, because we have been doing this for so many years, usually the organizations are very happy to talk about process, right? So now, not about the software and not about the specific incident, but they will say, okay, if we were to have a critical incident, then we would react like this, right? These are the people that would come in. These are the processes. These are the ways that we would work together. This is how it's all integrated. So they're very happy to explain what the capability is without specifically talking about an instance of it. Does that help?
Yeah. So with the organization that you use as the best practice, the gold class model, right? So they are happy for you to actually publish and tell the world about what they are doing because it's just about process level and nothing sensitive for them.
Well, okay, now that's a different question. So if you say has the organization written a letter to you saying that you can use this? Obviously not. And the reason why is because most of these organizations are legal organizations, right? Mm-hmm. So if they write a letter, it's like a legal statement. They would never, ever say you are permitted to do anything related to research or, internally within cyber. But what happens is they say, yep, if you are asking process level questions and these people are in charge, we trust you, right? So anonymize it, make sure that it's fully anonymized and they cannot track it back to us easily, and speak at a high level, and we're happy, right? So this now comes down to trust between the researcher and the people who run cyber. So it took us many years to get to a point where we could get access to these kinds of operations. And that was only until our MIS students began to lead the strategy for the whole organization, right? So our students who we trained when they were in 2005, when they were 18 years old, are now the global strategy lead for such organizations. They're the ones who will use their, you can say, political capital, their trust and their reputation to allow us to come in.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
There's some chat questions.
You have chat question. There's two questions from chat. So
what is the challenge? What is the challenge that you faced when you did your study? I think the biggest challenge we had when we were doing the study was to try to get the executives to give us time to work out the timings and their schedules, and then to deal with the executives who were not cooperating. So most of the executives were very happy to cooperate. We had a few that weren't. And so we had to figure out how to deal with the executives that were not cooperating, right? That was one big challenge for me. The other big challenge, I think, was trying to piece together the story. So, when you've got that much, you're asking every person you're interviewing the same question, right? How does your organization respond when you're under cyber attack, from the time that you detect to the time that you resolve it? And then you ask this question, everybody tells their own story. So one of the challenges is you got to take all the different stories from all the different levels and all the different sectors of the organization, and you got to piece together what you think is actually happening. And that is one of the hardest things to do, because you've got to obviously reconcile contradictions and figure out what's really happening and that sort of thing. That's another really big challenge for us. If a country decided to implement CBDC using DLT permission blockchain, is there any threat from cybersecurity? How do you know blockchain is safe? Sorry, not an expert in blockchain. Can't answer that question. That's a technical cyber question. Hello. Thank you for the insightful presentation. I have a question. This research, will you measure the state after the organization has developed awareness regarding organizational reason? What metrics will be used? Okay. Ika, would you like to unmute yourself and give us a little bit more context for this question, if you don't mind?
Oh, yes. Sure, Mr. Ahmad. Okay. I want to ask about, after this research, if I'm not mistaken, you observed the implementation of cybersecurity in this organization, and then would you do the evaluation after that? I mean, like how if maybe after the implementation has successfully the cybersecurity has successfully been implemented, do you have plan to evaluate it and to see the impact of the cybersecurity management in this organization? I mean, like how the impact to the...
Okay, so let me clarify. First of all, this organization is already at the gold standard, which is the highest level you can achieve. So we have been tracking this organization since 2006, right? We've been watching the organization go from very low base to world standard, right? So that's over many, many years. Now, we are going to use this organization to evaluate other organizations, right? We're not going to necessarily come back to this organization and say, well, you guys have implemented something new. How are you doing 6 months from now? Right. What we're going to do is we're going to use them as the benchmark for other organizations and look at their practices and then compare to see how well they're behaving.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, we
Arif,
also one question.
One question? Yep. Thank you for an excellent. I'm curious about your perspective. I'm curious about your perspective on the response, both from a technological and leadership standpoint. Based on the model you presented, how do you differentiate between internal and external threat actors?
Don't.
Yeah. So Arif, the purpose of the model is to understand how the organization develops situation awareness of its entire internal and external environment. So whether the threat actor is inside or outside, as you saw in that diagram, they have an internal custom analytics tool that's collecting data and putting up alerts about employee behavior. And they've got the logs coming from the external environment. And all of that is coming together to get a collective situation awareness, right? So we don't differentiate between internal and external threat actors. That's exactly the point. That's why they've got this kind of system where they don't differentiate. So they are equally protected, against internal versus external actors. I hope that makes sense. Sorry, we're over time. Can we have one more question?
Okay, the last question from Wajistiawan.
Yeah, it's amazing that you emphasize the process of how the organization responds. What are your thoughts on applying these measures and processes to more rigid organizations, such as government? Dealing with cybersecurity in the public sector can be somewhat bureaucratic. What recommendations do you have for a future? This is a fantastic question. I love your question. Great question. So, this is what we're doing in Malaysia. This is exactly what we're doing. This organization, what I did not talk about is power distance index, right? So in this organization, which is in the Australasian region, their power distance index is really low. What is power distance index? It's a measure of how much power a superior has over their subordinate. Okay. A supervisor has over their direct report. So if you think about your boss, how much power does your boss have over you? That's power distance index. In countries like Malaysia, Malaysia has the highest power distance index in the world, which means hierarchy and rigid structures. And Australia is on the lower end, which means very flat structure, and they're very happy to work outside of what the organization's structures are. So what's going to happen in an organization with a rigid structure is when they're in crisis, they cannot get around that structure. They are going to, in order to respond and to create new teams, they have to keep getting referrals from other people. Oh, you need to check with that person. You need to check with that person. I don't have the authority. He doesn't have the authority. And that will slow down your response a lot. So that's what we're saying. Okay. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you for the question from the audience and for the answer, Atif. So we have limit time for this session. I hope if there's more questions from the audience, they can contact you through email that on your personal page, atifahmad.me. So you can.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat right now. This is my email address.
Okay.
atif@unimelb.edu.au. And you're free to send me an email if you have a question.
Okay. Thank you.
Atif, is it possible to get the presentation, the slide?
Absolutely.
Because some
I will do that.
participant request the slide.
No problem.
Thank you.
Okay. So if you cannot access the presentation now, ladies and gentlemen, for the audience, so you can contact from for this email. So as for Atif or contact for the Faculty of Computer Science for this presentation. Okay. So for the last session, we have photo session. So can everyone open their camera so we can have a moment for screen documentation? So there's 60 participants. I think it's going to screen from my side. Okay. I hope everybody already opened the camera. Okay, ready everyone? Okay. Hold your smile until the second screen. For the first screen, 1, 2, 3, smile. And then the next screen, 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay. That's all for the whole participant. Thank you for the enlightenment discussion, everybody. So this is the end of our research talk. Hope you join again for another research talk that organized by Faculty of Computer Science. Again, thank you, Atif, for
Thank you.
This discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Adi, Vanessa, and everyone. Thanks, Atif. In particular, Sean is gone, so she's not in the photo.
Oh.
All right.
Okay, so we have
I'm still here.